Hi everybody, welcome to the Q&A today, answering your questions on meta admissions, the Mcat, and COVID-19. My name is Linda Abraham. I'm the president and founder of Accepted, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion on meta admissions, the Mcat, and COVID-19. I want to thank you very much for coming. Now, a few good to knows before I introduce our expert panelists and get to your questions. I'm sure you have a ton of them. One, if we ask questions, please respond in the chat window. Okay, you should find it in your control panel. So, yeah, I'm sure you all find it. If you want to ask questions, please post your questions in the question window. You can post at any time, and you can start posting them now. Okay, because I already have some questions prepared, both some that I prepared and some that others have sent in already. So please start doing that. And then when you leave, you're going to receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We really value your feedback, both Magoosh and Accepted. And I read all the feedback. I'm sure if somebody at Magoosh reads all the feedback. So please fill out that survey. And I'm not going to take up any time here with a special offer, but both Magoosh and Accepted will send you some juicy offers tomorrow morning. So look out for our emails if you want both excellent MCAT prep and med school admissions advising at prices. Now, we have an extraordinarily talented and experienced panel here. I know you have lots of questions, so I want to introduce the panelists and then immediately start taking your questions. First, our guest expert from Magoosh, Dr. Kat Thompson. She earned her PhD from UC San Francisco in medical sociology. She's been teaching pre-med and nursing students since 2005 and has been a curriculum manager at Magoosh since 2016. I'd also like to introduce Sydney Foote. Sydney worked at one time as an administrator at the University of Washington's School of Medicine and has worked for Accepted since 2001, assessing our medical school admissions clients and getting into MD and DO programs throughout the country and sometimes around the world. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Accepted's Dr. Herman Flash Gordon, who is the past chair of admissions at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, where he served in that capacity for 4 years. In addition to being a professor at the medical school for over 20 years. He is also a passionate teacher of problem solving and a patient mentor of medical school applicants. He's been an Accepted consultant since 2014. Now, what is the motivation for today's webinar? It's not just the typical med school admission cycle, obviously. These are tough times. MCAS is open and going to start processing applications on May 28th. But many of you have had MCAT test dates canceled. So you need to decide whether to A, wait for test centers to open, B, apply with your current test score if you have one, and C, apply next year. The uncertainty is tough, and while we are not prophets, we're going to do our best to answer your questions and provide guidance in these extraordinary times. We hope that we're going to be providing you that this guidance is going to result in at least increased clarity for you and maybe even reduce uncertainty and anxiety. Now let's turn to the questions. Again, you can post yours already in the question window. I have prepared a couple just to start with, and again, a couple of them are written in. I've also been emailed in, and I guess Sid is going to be further advised by her cat. But I don't mean cat from Magoosh, I mean the four-legged kind of cat. All right, Kat, to start with, can you review the changes in the MCAT because of COVID? Where are we at with that right now?
Right. So all the remaining exams for the year are going to be shortened exams. There will be 3 offered each day. And the way they've managed to do that is they've shaved off, I guess it's a total of 38 questions across the sections. And they've also reduced the time by an hour. Now, it's the way they're able to get as many people through as they're planning on, is they've also reduced a lot of the extra stuff that people usually do on exam day. So the tutorial in the beginning and the breaks have been shortened. Other than that, it's going to be the same as far as we know, proportion of questions per exam section. They still haven't said anything about passage-based questions versus discrete and what's going to be, what that breakdown is going to look like. But basically, you're looking at a shorter exam that's going to move faster 3 times a day, And that is, the first one is May 29th. Oh, the other thing is that the scores will be expedited. So everyone taking an exam through August 1st will actually get their scores back in about 2 to 2.5 weeks. And then people in later August, September, it's back to the normal.
Okay. Now, one of the questions that I think everybody's kind of asking, and we already have one of the participants have asked, an anonymous participant is asking, is there a chance that current MCAT dates could be canceled?
Right.
What do you think of that one?
Yeah. So this, I actually do not think it's very likely that the AMC as a whole is going to cancel any dates across states, across borders. Now, within local districts, county, city, state, yes, I think that there is a likelihood that there will be closures. So that's the reality of the situation. I do think that Pearson is trying to be cautious about that and not open test centers unless they think that they will stay open. So that's everyone's hope. But I think that there is a chance that centers could get closed.
Okay. And then here's one for Flash and for Sid. And I just want to mention something also too when we get to the attendees' questions. Attendees, I may unmute you. If you do not want to be unmuted, please just press the mute button on your control panel. That will But this is one that I had. And actually, it's also from Alexis, who wrote it in. If an applicant has a test, let's say in late June, and their score, or even early July, and their application isn't verified until the end of July, or let's say early August, or even late August, which is Alexis's question, will they be quote unquote late in the application process? Sid, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So what I've seen is the schools are really trying to make allowances for people to send in their scores later. What I read at places, I was just looking at University of Pennsylvania, for instance. Penn is interviewing and assessing applications, but you are not actually given an offer of admission until your MCAT scores have been recorded. But they are going through with everything else. So they're basing it on your, your secondaries, your experiences to date, your GPA, and doing interviews just the same as usual. So they're trying not to delay the season too long. Other schools are taking it in other ways, and I think there's going to be a lot of variation. But I think overall, they're going to try to make allowances for people to have later MCATs, or possibly require MCATs just before you make a final offer or an acceptance.
Okay, and then this one's for Kat. Any advice on keeping one's MCAT skills sharp if your test is postponed?
Right. So I know that this has been hard for people who've been already pushed back a couple months and studying right up to a couple weeks before your original dates. I think that, it's kind of funny, but here's a little bit of just psych review and thinking about this. There's the memory term context-dependent learning or retrieval. Says that one way to get a lot of what you've learned back is to try and kind of recreate the overall environment where you learned the content you did. So I think that for me, that I was thinking about this from how I do it, because sometimes I'm in Magoosh, like leaving the MCAT material for a while and coming back to it. And I find it really, really helpful to watch videos, like not just Magoosh videos, but videos, because there's something about that auditory stimulation of videos I've already seen. It just it re-triggers something. And I think anything that's tangible, flashcards, you'll find that once you get back into it, it will be there again. But you do have to review. So I think that, don't kill yourself trying to study everything over again. But I think a daily review, 45 minutes, maybe a little longer, is a really good idea. So that could be your choice of which topics that you tend to forget.
Okay. Now, Flash, if an applicant wants to apply SAP but doesn't have an MCAT, or perhaps doesn't have an MCAT that he or she is satisfied with, do you recommend that they apply and list one school in their application, or apply to the most likely schools they're going to apply to? How do you suggest they handle that situation?
So it gets a little tricky there in a donut hole because they have an MCAT already in the system. So, you know, by the old rules, their application, once it's verified, will go out to whatever schools they list. And it's not like they can hold back the application unless they don't list the other schools. And that's certainly something that they can do. So, you know, I know in talking to clients that they may think that they've done well on the test, and then when it comes back, it's, you know, up to 10 points lower than it had been, or just the opposite. So walking out of the test and deciding, oh, I'm going to apply this year or not, is a very difficult decision. So you may have to pull this strategy where you list one school, probably, you know, your in-state school, and don't list the other schools until you actually have that MCAT score back. And if you're confident in it, then go for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sid, do you have anything to add? Kat, anything to add?
The only thing I would like to add is I had a client today who was doing an assessment of how her application had changed since previous years for a committee. And she's someone that I had a year ago told her not to apply because her MCAT score was too low. And she filled out all of the applications before getting her MCAT score back. And I think that's going to be the hardest thing, is not knowing where you're truly competitive. And in the question it asked, what advice would you give to your past self? And I felt somewhat gratified because she said that she wished that she had listened to professionals who had advised her to not apply until she had the information, because otherwise it's really a shot in the dark. So you don't know if your practice scores are going to hold up when you're actually in the exam, especially if it's the first time you're taking it. So just, you know, you're making a decision without having all the information, and that's always difficult.
Okay. We have a question here another one for Kat from DeBroy. If we are planning to retake the MCAT to make up for a low score, do you guys suggest that we submit our application to the school? Actually, we just basically just answered that one.
The same, right.
That. So, all right, we answered it. No, this is the question I wanted to ask. It's from Dana. Thank you, DeBroy. Can you please speak to how the content will be distributed in the shortened MCAT exam? Also, are there practice exams that will help you practice for the shortened exam? Good question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, it broke up just a little bit on my end, but the question is, how are the questions distributed on the shortened exam?
Yes. Are there practice exams that will help you practice for the shortened exam?
Okay. So, you know, this was just announced by the AAMC. I think it was 2 weeks ago is when they just, you know, told everybody how these, what each section was going to look like in its shortened format. And so, you know, 48 questions for all 4 sections. You have 76 minutes for the 3 science sections, 81 minutes for cars. So that's a little bit flipped, right? Because usually cars is 5 minutes shorter than the science sections. Now it's 5 minutes longer, although they're all shorter. And you have 10-minute breaks between each one. Other than that, as far as we know, it's going to be the same types of passages and discrete questions. They're eliminating what they're called field test questions, which are kind of like these trial questions they sneak in there. They're not going to have those. But in terms of practicing, so there aren't that many companies who have the shortened version of a practice test out yet, but actually at Magoosh we do. So we were able to release that. And I believe if you just go to the website, I'm sure if you emailed anyone at Magoosh, they could direct you in the right direction, but it is available for free. We've made that available for free. So I also know that Next Step and I think Altius has also just shortened their exams. But as far as I know, only those 3 companies. But you can always just, pace yourself at the level of the passage the way you would normally, because you still have the same amount of time pretty much per question. So even if you don't have a
Okay.
shortened exam to work with.
We're getting this next question asked a couple of times, and it might be for all 3 of our panelists, really. I applied last cycle, and feedback told me I didn't get in because I scored low on my Mcat, 494. Will it affect my application this year if I'm not able to take the Mcat again until June, I guess, of next month? Will schools see my score for the last time and throw out my application again because my new score isn't in yet? And again, it's a very similar question from somebody else. Would it be bad to apply with a 4 score indicator the new score is on the way? Kat, you want to start with that one?
Sure. Okay. So it will say, you will say that you have another test that you're taking, that is in process. I'm not sure when in June you're planning on taking it, but pretty much any exam up through June 20th, those scores are going to be released before AMCAS sends everything to the medical schools. So those will all be released. You will get your score back July 7th or earlier, and no medical schools will see your scores from this season until for July 10. So on that level, there's really, you're in pretty good shape. If it's a little bit later than that, I think that's okay. I think that what they want to see when you've had a low MCAT score in a previous cycle is that you've improved, and those are it's actually kind of a good thing, because as opposed to if you had high MCAT scores before and high GPA before, and you come back and reapply with that same package, the schools, they're going to wonder, why did this person get cut before? There must be something, about this person's, character or background or interests. But they understand that people often don't do well on their MCAT the first time. And yes, they will be able to see it. They will be able to see that score.
All right, here's a question for Sid and for Flash. Some of our classes were not adjusted for online curriculum as much as others, and for those reasons, many students at UC Berkeley have taken a combination of pass, no pass, and graded. Will this be accepted by medical schools, or should we explicitly explain this in our application? Flash, you want to start with that one?
So the question is whether or not they can use pass-fail courses?
Well, that's not really the question. Is do they need to explain why they took pass-fail courses?
Oh, I think everybody's aware of what's going on right now. So they'll see the pass-fail this semester, and it is what it is. And it's not going to be held against you. So.
Okay.
Some schools are saying that if your course, that they will require proof of doing a pass-fail, that's the only option offered. So check the school requirements.
Okay, good point. Anything to add, Kat? No.
Just that I've looked at several med schools that have all come out and said that they're accepting pass, no pass. But there might be some that aren't. I haven't found that yet.
Okay, this one's for Sid to start with. When you reapply to medical, it's not specifically a COVID one, but it's a good one. When you reapply to medical school, are you supposed to rewrite your personal statements, secondaries, and work activity section? So that's a big question.
I missed the end of it. So rewrite the
When
personal.
you reapply to medical school,
Uh-huh.
are you supposed to rewrite your personal statement, secondaries, and work activity section?
Hopefully you've done a lot to improve your application since you applied before. So to that extent, yes, you will need to definitely update your personal statement and your activities, and hopefully your secondaries as well. If you did get in with it last time, chances are there was an issue that could be improved upon. So it's a big investment of time and energy and money, and I would suggest that you pull out all the stops to put, if not a brand new personal statement, at least spend some quality time updating it with new activities and just make sure that it's the best that it can be at this point in time. And same with the
Flash?
activities.
Yeah, go ahead.
So
Flash, do you have anything to add?
I wonder if the concern is that the med school admissions committees see the previous application, and if they see it just a repeat, that looks bad. Most admissions committees don't have the time to go back and look at the previous applications. But I totally agree with Sid. You've had a year to incubate on this. You've had a year to develop everything. You should have new things to say. Or you should be able to say it in better ways. The other issue, I think, is that you will be rewriting your personal statement because you've put in another year. And your personal statement typically interacts a lot with your 3 most meaningful experiences. And so if you've rewritten your personal statement, you better be rewriting those most meaningful experiences so that they mesh together properly.
Great. Kat, do you have anything to add? Okay. And I want to add something. I think it's mandatory that you at least have those things critiqued, because if you are writing them in a way that doesn't present you well, even if you got more experiences, you could be making the same mistakes you made last time, and you don't want to do that. It's really, really expensive. Now, I said I wasn't going to plug anything, but I am going to plug one thing, and that is our rejection review service. I've also interviewed many medical school admissions directors, and at least some of them say, well, they're not reviewing necessarily the applications as Flash just said. They might see notes from last year, or they might just think this person hasn't done anything new. And if they do go back for whatever reason to the previous year's app, they're not going to be impressed with the lack of investment in the application process. So, well, I completely agree with Flash and Sid. I'd go even further. You don't have to change everything, every activity description necessarily, especially if the activity is from a little while ago, but you should at least look at them and see if they're really presenting you effectively. Okay? So that's enough of my editorializing. I'm supposed to be moderating. Here we go. Let's see, for Kat. This is actually in the chat window. Do you know of any measures that are being taken that in terms of practicing social distancing or other safety precautions?
So Pearson has said that they will allow masks and gloves. They are not going to supply those, though, so people need to bring in their own. Reduced capacity at testing centers, but I don't know exactly what that is. I'm not sure what percentage. I do know that part of the reason they decided to offer 3 tests each testing day was because they realized that there couldn't be as many spots each time the test was offered. So that is being taken into consideration. Aside from that, that's all I know about. But it's, I would go to Pearson's website. They might have more details posted, and look specifically at the center that you will be taking your exam at.
Okay. So that one we did. And then there's a question here. Will there be leniency on volunteer work as well as research experience? Sid, do you want to take that one?
That's what everybody's wondering right now, I think. I don't honestly have an answer. I think your application, if you already have a strong research applicant experience and strong volunteer experience, your application is going to be a lot stronger than other people who had planned to try to push it in this year. I mean, hopefully, if you're a strong pre-med, you haven't been waiting until the summer when you're applying to get all your volunteer experience, so you'll have something. But I do think people will probably be at an advantage if they have, a more consistent and long-lasting and more substantial experiences to bring to the table when they apply. So I think we're going to have to wait and see.
I think there might be some leniency if they stopped because of COVID, but there's not going to be leniency about all the time up to that. Flash, what do you have to say about that question?
Yeah, I totally agree that what admissions committees are looking for is that very consistent long-term trajectory towards medical school. But they will be necessarily lenient for this year. I mean, research labs have closed down, clinical studies have closed down, opportunities in elder care homes, those are all closed down. Uh, we had a webinar recently where we discussed other things that you can do. And so be expecting in your interview a question about what you did to help out during COVID. So, and is that previous webinar archived? Can people go look at it?
It is definitely available. If you go to exhibit.com and you search for COVID webinar, you probably get 2 COVID medical school webinars. You'll get this one and that one. So there were a lot of good questions and answers on that one. Not specifically MCAT related, that's CAT's territory, but more the medical school admission stuff. Okay. Let's see. There's a question here. Kat, do you have tips for staying motivated while studying for the MCAT?
That's a hard one. I know for students, it's not hard to come up with tips, but I know what a struggle that is. I think, one really simple thing that helps raise motivation is just going online and reading about other student successes. So whether you're taking the MCAT for the second time, or you're having to self-teach maybe one of the courses, prereqs, it's encouraging to see that other people have done it and to kind of get a sense that, yeah, you can do it too. But I guess another thing I notice is that students in general, but pre-med students in particular, tend to be very, very hard on themselves. And if you are berating yourself every time you sit down because you don't know a concept, you're not going to feel motivated. So the more you can find ways of recognizing the ways that you've improved, the little things you're learning, that helps motivation. And then I guess the third thing I would say is I always recommend students build in buffer time to their study schedules. So if you get behind, you're actually not behind. So I always say at least 1 buffer day a week, and then you want like a whole buffer week every so many weeks, just to make sure that if something goes off, you don't feel like you're derailed from your plan, because that's not motivating either.
All right, here is a question from an anonymous attendee. Should we make use of all 15 activities? Sid, what do you have to say about that?
I mean, hopefully you'll have more than 15 activities to talk about. If you have 13 substantial ones, that's great. 12 substantial ones, it's, you could leave the other ones blank, but, hopefully you've been active in your undergraduate and, in your pre-med training experiences. So hopefully you've got 15 activities to talk about. Don't disregard things like hobbies, things that you've been involved in for years that you might not consider relevant to medicine. Gardening, for instance, if you've helped out with your family garden, that can be a hobby. That can be something that shows, maybe not a commitment to your community, but definitely an interest and creativity and expression in different ways. The key with the activities is really to show that you're well-rounded and to be able to relate to people from different backgrounds and different walks of life. And there's many different things that you could bring to your experiences. So if you're finding you have less than 15, really drill down and see what else you might be able to add. Not just fluffy things to fill it out, but really try to get some good, substantive, but broad experiences there. Yeah. Don't apply with just 5 or 6 experiences. That just will not work for you.
Josh, any dad?
The experiences aren't numbered on the AMCAS, so it's not like your reviewer is actually going to know if you've got 14 or 15 activities, but it certainly shows if you only have 7. So I like to see at least 10. The other warning on activities is don't break up an activity into 2 just so you have more activities. That'll be pretty obvious. So as Sid said, make sure that they're all substantive.
Okay. All right, great. Let's see. This can, all right. Kat, you might have covered this. This is from Shreya. What resources would you recommend for practice tests for the MCAT?
Okay. Well, definitely the official materials. So the AAMC now has 4 full-length exams. Finally, for a while there was only like 2, and they also have a sample test, so you can take that as well. You definitely want to make sure you have all of those. In addition to those, I mean, there are different. They're all pros and cons, I think, of all the different exams that aren't the official exams. But, a lot of students I guess what I would say is that it's probably best if you can to find a test company that has some kind of online component so you can kind of get the practice at the computer. But yeah, I think just trying out different sources. So I know that Exam Crackers has really reasonably priced. You can get a big bundle of practice tests. At Magoosh, we have 3. Next Step has quite a few. Kaplan, I think all of these companies have strengths, at least in certain areas. Score estimates might not be totally on, but you'll get a lot from just taking other practice tests as well.
All right. And then I don't know if this can be for any of you. We have several questions coming in, and here's just an example of it. If you take the MCAT exam after August 1, is it better to apply next year since the score will be released in September? And the variation is, if you take it after August 15th, is it better to apply next year? And then there's one, if you take it after September 1, is it better to apply next year? After what point is it better to apply next? That's my version. Okay, is it better to apply next year? Flash, you want to start with that one? Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, let's see. I think Kat mentioned that they're trying to get the exams out in 2 weeks. So that means August 1st is really an August 15th return. And that's still okay. I think especially this year, even though the admissions committees are still on the same schedules as previous years, they really can't back the schedule up any further. But I think that people are anticipating that instead of this huge wave at the beginning, right, that it's going to be much more spread out. So we're flattening the curve in terms of med school admissions. And I think you can expect to get a good review even if you're coming in August. September is pushing it. I have to say, I remember discussions on the admissions committee where we would get these spectacular applications right at the very end, 2 days before the deadline. And they were great, and we accepted them. It's like, if you're good, you're good. So you'll get in. So.
Right. Sid, do you have anything to add on that?
The only thing, again, is that I think it's hard to make that decision about where you're competitive if it's the first time you're taking it and you don't know how your score's going to turn out. So you could end up with a lot of schools that you just don't have a chance at. So just be aware of that.
Kat, do you want to add anything to that one? It's kind of borderline for both MCAT and admissions more.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like Flash, I think that August 1st test date is really interesting. That's one that the AAMC has decided to expedite. And I do believe that they see that as part of this kind of, early-ish wave still, given the circumstances. So I think anything August 1st is definitely going to be fine. I think if you get your scores back in September, that's probably going to be fine. October, I'm not sure. That's pushing it. I guess it depends on how strong your application materials are.
Relative to the schools you're applying to.
Right.
I get this question a lot. Come August, September, every year. People call up and they get referred to me, or we have a webinar and this question gets asked. And my response is, a little bit different. The response is, if you want to enhance the chances that you're going to apply absolutely one time, then wait for next year, when you have your score, you have your experiences, everything's lined up, and you can apply early, first, second week of June. If you are willing to risk rejection in order to have a chance at starting medical school a year earlier, then you can consider applying in August or September. I'm not sure I would I think I'm with you, Kat. I'm not sure I would recommend October, but there really is a trade-off. And anyway, that's how I usually respond to the question around this time. And I completely agree with all of you that I think the schools, first of all, there's no stamp that goes on your file, you're late. That's kind of Flash's point. It's just, how do you compare? How many spaces do they have left? They have a lot of spaces. They're going to be more, that kind of stuff. So it's not like, boom, you're late, or here you're early, here you're in the middle, and here you're late. There's a continuum. It's not discrete. So a lot of it's just you weighing up how much effort you're willing to put in if the chance of acceptance is somewhat reduced. How much reduced? Don't know. Okay. Okay, back to being monitored. Okay, did that one. You folks are asking wonderful questions. Thank you very, very much. I answered that one. I didn't answer it. You answered it. Kat, what is the latest date with this new ABCAT? Can applicants take the MCAT since it is a shortened MCAT? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, it's through September. I think I wrote it down. It's the end of, what is the very last date? September 28th. And then that's it for 2020.
Oh,
so
all right.
Then you're looking into the 2021.
Okay.
But all of those are going to be the shortened version.
Okay, Flash, this one's for you from Ava. How should I go about applying to MD PhD programs if I'm not taking my MCAT until the end of July? Did you hear me?
She's just worried that it's too late to get her MCAT score.
That's what yeah, I'm guessing that's what it is.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. I had a spectacular client a few years ago who, he had 2 first author publications and, Nature and something else. And he worked in a really high powered lab at Columbia. And I still advised him to wait until the end of his summer experience because he had basically no clinical experience and he was going to get it that summer. And so he got it, and he got into 6 top MD PhD programs applying at the end of August. So I don't think that there's any sort of cutoff there. I think, and especially MD PhD programs, they're going to be processed a little bit differently, and the interviews tend to go a little bit later in the season. So I wouldn't worry so much about it. So.
Great. All right, here's a question for all 3 of you. And Sid, you can start with this one. What, if anything, can you do to continue demonstrating interest in medicine during this time? Is it appropriate to ask physicians about shadowing?
I guess it depends on where you are and what kind of restrictions. I was talking to someone in California, and they have a job. They have a scribing job that's set up to start, I believe, at the end of May. They don't know yet if that's going to happen or not. But I mean, certain places are coming out of this and will be able to start that sort of thing up again. I do think hospitals are going to be really cautious of having new volunteers coming in, especially in, high risk situations. They will be, really determined to try to contain any risks that, working in the ER may pose, or ICU or anything like that. So there may be fewer positions like that. In terms of looking for doctors in private clinics, that might be the way if you wanted to shadow a dermatologist, for example, or other fields where you're less, you know, there's less risk than a hospital environment would present. That might be the way to go. But really, it will depend on what the restrictions are in your neighborhood, and you won't want to put any doctors or patients at any risk. That's the main thing. So just in terms of getting clinical experience, it's really going to be a case-by-case thing.
Okay, let's see. This is for a cat. Will our scores be averaged against everyone taking the test on the same day as us, or only against everyone at the same time on a specific date? In other words, just the 6:30 a.m. administration, whatever time it is, on June 28th. And then the second one, where can we get practice? Well, I think you already answered the second one. Just where can we practice the Mcat tutorial since it's no longer part of the exam? This is from Randy.
Oh, okay. I'm actually going to answer that one first, that part of the question, because it's just right on the top of my head right now. So as far as I know, the AAMC said they were going to release something that the students could start practicing, because it's not going to be part of the in-center experience. And as far as I know, they haven't yet. So I'm not sure. There might be threads about that on Reddit, but I haven't found anything yet about that. My guess is it's not going to be that different from their regular format. So you could, taking practice tests, their regular practice tests is probably going to be very, very similar in terms of the overall layout. Now I'm forgetting the other part of it. So what
First part of it is, will our scores be averaged against everyone
right.
taking the test? Yeah.
Yeah, so the way that Mcat is set up is they kind of validate the questions through a different modality. So sometimes some exams are going to be harder than others, but they're able to sort of see statistically which questions are harder, and they have very specialized ways of weighting that, with the idea that really it should all even out across everybody. So the score you wind up getting, like 512 or something, that score has already been tinkered with based on how many questions you got right to try and make it fair. And so that's partly why they try and do a lot of pre-testing on their questions, just so they have a good sense of, is this a hard question or is this an easy question? So it's not going to be based on the people you're taking the test with that day. It's based on everybody who gets a score, who gets an MCAT score, at least within a given year.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And
So, Kat, it sounds like you're saying that there's going to be less sort of validation between test dates and the like. Do you think the scores will be wonkier this year?
Well, it's hard. Will they be wonkier?
What do you mean by wonkier?
Like more
like sort of, higher,
lots of highs, lots of lows,
right?
less
so
of a bell curve.
Right. So people come away with a score that's very different than what they expected, maybe higher, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there will be more variability than usual because you've got people testing it close to midnight. You've got people who are maybe trying to do it with gloves on. You've got other people who are like, this is great because I can't do it for 6.25 hours, but I can do it in 5.25. So you're going to see both of those. You're going to see, I think, a little bit more variability. But in terms of the actual questions, I mean, they're removing 38 questions total. So instead of 230, it's down to 192. And about a third of those that are removed are just test questions anyway. They're just field test questions. They're not like real questions. So I don't think it's going to be that much different. But I do think we're going to see some people are really it's going to work to some people's advantage, and some people are going to suffer because of it.
Okay. Let's see. Should I apply even if I do not have any research or shadowing experience? Sid, you want to take that? It's from an anonymous attendee. There. Oh, you. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you've done. I can't just say if you have other great clinical experience, then possibly. but I can't say, I mean, a person can apply without research experience. A person can apply unless the school requires it without shadowing experience. Is that a great idea? Not necessarily, but it really depends on your overall experiences. So,
Well, let's say you've been a scribe and you haven't shadowed, or you've been a scribe and an EMT.
yeah, then I mean, that experience, that's a wonderful clinical experience. Some schools do require shadowing. Whether or not they count scribing as shadowing, I'm not positive. So, it would matter checking with those schools. But yeah, scribing is a great clinical experience to have. So it really would depend on your specific case.
Okay.
Gosh, what would you think?
So I agree. You don't have to have research experience. You do have to have clinical experience, and whether, how that all pans out, it makes for a strong application. It really depends. That I usually think of it as you want to, in clinical experiences, you want to have both depth as well as breadth. And the shadowing gives you the breadth. So you get to see different specialties of medicine, get some idea of what you might want to be doing in the future. And, but yeah, so if you're scribing in a emergency department, then you're getting a lot of breadth there as well. So.
Okay. All right, this one's for Kat. From Sharmini, who sent in before. He's here, but who sent in before. I have my Mcat scheduled for the end of June. With the changes to the Mcat regarding COVID-19, would you advise changing preparation while taking practice tests? As the Mcat test length will now be 5 hours and 45 minutes as opposed to longer term that was previously 7 hours and 30 minutes.
So the question was kind of in the middle there. I'm not sure I completely understood it. The question was how to practice for the shortened exam?
Yeah, should you change your practice?
Oh, change the style that you practice.
Yeah. Would you advise changing preparation while taking practice tests?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say definitely take practice tests just like the test conditions, which is 10-minute breaks, 3 10-minute breaks. So most years there's a 30-minute break in the middle. And you want to remember that probably 2 minutes of that is just going to be getting checked back into the testing room, because every time you leave, you have to get readmitted to the testing room. So kind of getting used to the shorter overall exam sections and shorter breaks. But, I think most practice students do is not in the form of full length practice tests. I think a lot of students just do, passages or an exam section. And the passages, I think the pacing, based on what we know, and we don't know everything about how many passages it's even going to have, which is kind of frustrating. But based on what we know, I think the pacing per passage, whatever you've been using, is still going to work. It's definitely still going to work for the cars section, and probably for the science sections as well. So I would say, practice doing the exam section in the new time constraints. But if you're just practicing a passage, it's not going to be different.
Okay. All right, great. Here's the question for Sid. Let me find this again. The question was basically some tips for the personal statement.
Just general tips.
Can't find the exact wording at the moment. We have lots of questions. Again, the questions are coming in. They're excellent. Of course, I'm not finding the exact wording, but the question is, here it is. What advice can you give us applicants to make our personal statement stand out or be memorable in a good way? You don't want to be memorable in a bad way.
Right. So that's a huge question. And really, I don't know if I can answer it just in a very brief way.
We have a lot of resources. Let me send, I'll also post some resources on Accepted that.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
When I'm working with a client, I try to find patterns in their activities, things that they have done consistently, that they have some substance, and anything that might stand out. So it's kind of it's lining up those components, like what are the things that they have, what are the skills they've relied on, what are the experiences that kind of have shaped them and brought them to medicine? This is such a huge question that it's really hard to answer. But I think the big thing that you want to do is you want to present who you are authentically in a way that shows you are driven to medicine, that you've been preparing in depth for medicine, that's not just a whim, and that you're ready for the rigors of medical school. And there's a million ways that you can, satisfy all of those things. But I think those basically are the biggest three elements that I try to bring to consulting with my clients.
Flash or Kat, do you have anything to add to that?
So when I've talked to people who review applications, they say that once your application, is you've had your interview and your whole file is put together and it goes to the admissions committee, that personal statement is 50% of their evaluation. And so I would go straight to the personal statement and read that before I would read the rest of the application. And it frames how you put the rest of the application together when you're considering the applicant.
Okay. Kat?
I mean, that's great advice. The only thing I would add is just that a lot of times students have really done well with admissions essays, maybe getting into college or other times that are a little bit less. For med school applications, personal statement, you want it just to be a little bit more professional. So you definitely want to talk about your personal experience, but there's a way in which what is kind of a charming story for undergrad doesn't come across as focused enough for med school. So get someone to look over your essay and make sure that you have kind of that focus and everything is coming together and you sound like someone really organized who knows where they're going.
Great advice. I also did post a link to more extensive personal statement advice that we offer. And anything on that page is free. So it's not the one-on-one advising, which we also recommend. We're having several questions from different people. And I'll take this one from Aniska. Do you expect this cycle to have a lower volume of applicants? If so, what will be the implications of this lower volume? And the question, that's one version of it. The more common version of it in terms of the questions from the attendees is, do you expect this cycle or the following cycle to be different in terms of competitiveness? Kat, you can start with that one. It's not directly MCAT related, but this is all speculation.
No,
so.
yeah. I've been asked this by students
Sure.
a couple times in the past month.
A couple.
So, yeah. So I think, I have a feeling that the upcoming year probably will be a little bit more competitive because there will be a backlog of people and people whose maybe plans have gotten put off for a variety of reasons. But I wouldn't let that be a deciding factor. I think that in some ways it's if you're using that to decide when to apply, I think that's not the right angle to go for. So if you're a strong applicant now, and now's the time to apply. So think of it more in that terms instead of thinking about how the competition stacks up, because what you can change is a much bigger piece of the equation.
Okay. Flash, do you have anything to add to that one in terms of anticipating which cycle is going to be more competitive, and Kat's follow-up comment that shouldn't be decisive?
Yeah, I think this coming cycle will be will be a little bit less competitive, but whether or not, as Kat was saying, that's a deciding factor is very much up to you. It's like, and if you're thinking, oh, maybe I should wait and I'll be stronger, it's like, well, maybe you should, right? If it's coming down to that. But if you're confident, I don't see a reason not to apply this cycle. I think there's going to be pressure on med schools to train more doctors. And so hopefully this cycle, there will be some more openings, and the cycle after that, there'll be even more openings. So it's a little, we really don't know what the supply demand curves are going to look like in the end. But yeah, I think fundamentally I agree with Kat. If you're ready, go for it. If you're doubting yourself, then think about it.
Sid?
So I originally thought this might be a less competitive year. I'm not sure I think that right now, just because I'm looking at the way schools are trying to make their adjustments, and they are, I think I mentioned to you last week, I feel like they're trying to play both sides, that they're saying, yes, we're going to be accommodating for later MCATs and, later our pass fail and all this, but at the same time, we want you to have these requirements. It's really uncertain how they're going to fill all of those spots with, if they still want those requirements, if they still want the MCAT to be taken by a certain date, if they are still trying to get the same quality and the same caliber of applicants. But I think they are shooting for that, and I think there are a lot of people who were planning to apply this year who do have the background, or who have applied in past years and didn't get accepted. They may have a better chance. If you don't have the clinical experience, like Kat and Flash said, if you don't have the experience to this point and you're questioning it, it's not a good time. But I don't think it's going to necessarily be that much less competitive than later years. But I mean, it is all uncertain, so we'll see how it works out in the end. I'm still basing things deciding on which schools to apply to based on previous scores. I don't think previous GPAs are going to be changing that much. Maybe MCATs will change a bit, but the rest of the factors that the schools are using, I think, is going to try to stay the same.
This question is for Kat from Kamala. How close in comparison are Magoosh practice test scores to the AAMC practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we validate our questions in a couple different ways. We correlate, so students' scores on Magoosh questions with students' self-reported scores pre-Magoosh and also post their eventual MCAT score. So we look at that to try and keep our questions at least at the same difficulty level. And then we also do some kind of internal validation to make sure that a question has some sort of internal validity, consistency. I think in terms of section by section, I mean, students have said different things. I mean, what I personally think is I think they're probably the, no, I don't know if I would say that. I was going to say that they were the best for the chem physics section, because we had some really strong people help write those. But then the biology, other people have been saying the biology. So what is true is that we've really, really looked at questions closely and tried to model them, and it's an online format, and we check our metrics.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. There's lots of these kinds of questions, but I'm just going to pose one, okay? This is from an also anonymous attendee. Can a high MCAT with a master's degree of 3.9 and an average undergrad GPA help in areas where you lack, such as extracurriculars? And Sid, you want to start with that one?
I didn't get the whole question.
Come again. Okay.
Yeah.
Can a high MCAT with a high GPA and a master's degree and an average undergrad GPA help in areas if you like a lack of extracurriculars?
So you're just focused on academics? No, not really. If doctors were just chosen based on their grades, then the application process would look a lot different. The medical schools want people who are well-rounded, who are able to work with people, and that's where the experience come in. And I mean, if you have just, had your nose to the grindstone and got great grades, it's great, but you probably won't have gained the leadership skills, the teamwork skills, the communication skills, all the other things, the softer skills that medical schools prize very highly. So if you don't have the extracurriculars, you need to balance that in some way with activities in your community, in clinical work, in other areas of your life. would be my advice.
Okay. Flash, do you want to add to that? This would be, again, the person with high grad GPA, okay, undergrad GPA, not too much in the way of extracurriculars.
I think that would have worked 40 years ago. Some of my colleagues brag that they had never been in a hospital.
You just got muted, Flash. Flash, you just got muted.
Oh, sorry. Some of my colleagues brag that they never went into a hospital before they got into med school, and they got in strictly based on their MCAT score, and those days are long gone. They want to see that you've been on this path for a very long time.
Okay, great. Here's a question for Kat. Due to the different times the test is being administered, how would you advise us to adjust our sleep study schedules? My test specifically is at 6:30 a.m. I have trouble both falling asleep and waking up. And when I do, I am exhausted. And I fear I can figure out how to get into a good sleep cycle routine. That first hour or so, my test will be affected, and any and all tips would be appreciated.
Okay, so it sounds like this person just has difficulty with sleep in general. So it's not just a matter of timing, but overall. I think that there's a lot that's been written, especially recently, about sleep hygiene. I think, the days are getting longer. So I would say, invest in some blinds. If you're this close to the exam, chances are that anxiety is playing a big role as well. Not doing anything too vigorous in the hours leading up to bed. Walking tends to be very soothing if you do feel like you need movement in the evening. Watching caffeine intake. In terms of sleep study schedule, you want to get sleep, but you also want to get some practice with that early morning time slot. So I would say, even though it's difficult and you're going to be really tired, definitely wake up early a few times, several times leading up to the exam. And I think based on what I know, that's the advice I'd give.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we have lots of questions. It's now 6 o'clock. Is it okay if we extend for a few more minutes? Yeah? Okay. Okay, we discussed that a little bit before. Okay, here's an interesting question. I'm an ultra runner contemplating using running as, quote, my most meaningful instead of labeling it as just a hobby. I'm afraid that it may not be viewed well. However, running has led to community events, e.g. coordinating volunteering at races, helping pace beginners, and teaching lifestyle changes through group runs, etc. Would it be best to just treat it as a hobby and not put it down as the most meaningful? Flash, you want to start with that one?
It sounds like it's very meaningful to this person, so it should be a most meaningful activity. I can see it being part of a theme in a personal statement even. We've had some really good athletes as med students. Some of them are selected because they're really good team players, so they play on a team. Others of them have been individual athletes. And that sort of dedication and focus to achieving in a sport oftentimes translates over to the academics of med school. So it can be something that sells very positively to an admissions committee.
Okay, great. Sid, do you have anything to add?
Nope, that's great advice.
Okay. We've had a couple of people ask, but I'm just going to ask this one, Kat. This is for you. How do you suggest we tackle the absence of a 30-minute lunch break during the shortened Mcat test? That time was really important for taking a mental break from the original version.
So this is actually, I answer one question of the day on Instagram, and this was my question. This is what I answered today because it's been coming up a lot.
Okay.
Especially as the test dates are becoming real now that students can actually register. So I think I would just say break it up into, assume a couple minutes are going to go towards checking in, a couple minutes for bathroom. For snack, you don't do anything heavy. You know, keep the snacks very simple, light. You know, it's 5.5 going on towards 6 hours. You know, you'll be fine with just a couple snacks, and then definitely take at least 2 of those minutes, if not longer, to do something that either regulates your breathing or your point of attention, or that just gets you moving. So I had one student who talked all about how she did jumping jacks, you know, during her break, and she felt ridiculous, but it helped. It like gave her that energy. So I think just kind of going in with the attitude that this is how it is, you know, how can I make it work? It's not ideal, clearly. And then also, as I said earlier today, have an actual meal ready to eat when you're done, even if you're taking the 6 p.m. exam, because afterwards you're likely to have a, you know, rebound hunger will probably kick in after the exam.
And this one for Sid and Flash. What do admissions look for in non-traditional applicants, especially someone who's been a healthcare provider for a few years? The non-traditional applicant has a few years of clinical experience, but lower scores on the Mcat can the experience outweigh the Mcat score? In other words, how heavily is the score really looked at? So there's a lot of questions in there, but Sid, you want to take that one?
Sure.
And
So
then Flash will be.
in terms of lower scores, if you're talking to MCAT and your GPA, I think the biggest concern is that you might not be able to handle the medical school curriculum. So being able to prove that possibly with taking some recent courses can help, depending how long you've been out of school for. The experiences are very, 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 very important. And, you know, the schools will weigh that to a large extent. Osteopathic schools, I think, might be something that you'd want to look into. They do value that kind of experience over the more quantitative factors a bit more than allopathic schools tend to. But I do think in both cases, showing that you're able to, you know, that you won't fall behind in medical school is really important. Beyond that, for non-traditional students, I think bringing in the experiences that you've had, not discounting them, even if they don't seem directly relevant to medicine. And if you've been in the healthcare field, they probably are. But being able to show the skills and things that the qualities that you'll bring to the profession is really important, even if they aren't directly applicable or directly linked to medicine. They will still be applicable.
Flash?
I really like Sid's idea of taking some more courses to show that you can do it now. So.
All right. You know, we have lots of thank yous coming in for everybody, and I want to share them with all of you four, with Kat, with Sydney, and with Flash. I also want to thank the attendees for your excellent questions. I want to point out that the staff at Magoosh and Accepted are here to help you. I recently saw a study called Social Support and the Perception of Geographic Slant. Now, yesterday, for the first time in 2 months, I got to go on a hike. And I like hiking and was really happy about it. But anyway, the study concludes that participants accompanied by a friend estimated a hill to be less steep when compared to participants who were alone. That's a quote. Applying to medical school is like climbing a steep mountain, far steeper than the one I went on yesterday. There are bends in the road, sometimes obstacles to scramble over, switchbacks along the way. And you don't have to go it alone or take a do-it-yourself approach to your professional future. We're not talking about, you know, going for a walk. You don't have to take a do-it-yourself approach, professional future, and your lifelong dream career. We at Magoosh and Accepted would love to be your supportive guides and friends as you climb that mountain. Now, Magoosh provides outstanding online MCAT prep with videos, explanations, sample questions, and email support, perfect for this era of virtual everything. And Accepted provides remote, one-on-one guidance on school choice, advice on primary applications, essay writing, activity descriptions, most meaningful experiences, secondary applications, what schools to apply to, and mock interviews for med school applicants. Tomorrow morning, I mentioned before, you're going to get emails from both Magoosh and Accepted with some really great offers. Just that's not on our site. It's just going to be in those emails. So keep your eyes peeled, and then optimize your application by earning an outstanding MCAT score with Magoosh's online test prep and polishing all other elements of your applications with Accepted's guidance. You don't have any need to climb that mountain alone. We're here to be that friend climbing it with you. So you can learn more at mcat.magoosh.com and accept.com/medical services, or just watch out for those emails tomorrow. Thanks again to you applicants for coming. Thanks again to Dr. Kat Thompson of Magoosh and Accepted Sydney Foote, Dr. Herman Flash Gordon. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to participate in this, your expertise, of course. And otherwise, just good luck with your medical school applications, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you again.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bye-bye.